The Australian Parliament is currently debating two bills which could have very negative impacts on those living in poverty in Australia. The Welfare Reform Bill could become law as soon as Tuesday if it passes the Senate. The legislation is complex and technical, and the average observer will soon get lost in the minutiae and jargon, but a close reading reveals a clear underlying agenda. It's not, as advertised, based on employment promotion, efficiency, targeting, dignity, and the other terms used by the government to describe it. Rather, the goal is to make welfare increasingly unsustainable, difficult to secure, and demeaning. The assumption seems to be that this will force people living in poverty to give up their supposedly willful refusal to work and to renounce their bad habits, such as alcohol abuse and gambling. The legislation seeks to consolidate in important ways the evolution of Australia's social welfare system over the past 2 decades, from the provision of a comprehensive safety net as part of a conception of social citizenship, as we see in Europe, for example, to a set of highly conditional and limited benefits enabling the very worst off to subsist, but in misery. Each added obstacle or barrier moves the Australian system further away from respecting either the human right to social security or the human right to an adequate standard of living, both of which have long been accepted by Australia as part of its treaty obligations. If enacted, the Welfare Reform Bill will subtly reduce the entitlements that many people, including many single mothers, already struggle to survive on, and highly complex rule changes governing the new job seeker payment will make the system even harder to navigate for vulnerable people. It fails to recognise human error in its many forms and will penalise people who need support rather than punishment. While I applaud the government's removal of the drug testing trial from this bill, remaining provisions still risk violating Australia's human rights obligations. The other bill, the Cashless Debit Card Bill, if passed, would expand the so-called cashless debit card trial. Under that scheme, welfare recipients receive a grey debit card on which 80% of their welfare entitlements are deposited. Embedded software blocks purchases of restricted products, such as alcohol, drugs, or gambling-related goods. Recipients receive only 20% of their benefits in cash. From a policy perspective, it's clear that addiction to alcohol, drugs, or gambling should be discouraged. But as America's short-lived but painful experience with prohibition demonstrated, schemes that simply seek to cut off the supply of such things won't succeed unless something is done to suppress demand through treatment and appropriate forms of assistance. Coercing and stigmatizing those who use the readily identifiable cash cards won't prevent any number of schemes to circumvent the restrictions. At the same time, the recipient is limited in terms of the type of goods that can be purchased and the establishments in which they can shop. Their freedom to structure their lives as they think best is undermined, and dependency and paternalism are promoted. The existing cashless debit card trial also has significant connotations of racism. It has been run in predominantly Indigenous communities, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have long faced racially discriminatory, paternalistic and stigmatising policies are now guinea pigs for these latest experiments in control through welfare. Reports of increased domestic violence and child hunger in these communities since the introduction of the trials are a clear warning signal that these ideas need to be rethought in a consultative and open-minded way. Policy making to address problems of addiction must be based on evidence of what works and why. The government pushes these reforms through Parliament under the guise of strengthening Australia's social safety net through simplifying the system and ensuring financial sustainability. On the face of it, these are laudable objectives, just as moving individuals from welfare to work is a very worthy goal. But the government has failed to produce any evidence to back up its claims that these objectives can actually be promoted by the specific policies proposed. The driving force instead seems to be an ideology that denounces the poor as lazy, heralds the market as the solution for all social ills, and insists that what people really need is a good kick in the backside to escape poverty. The result is an approach to welfare reform in Australia that's counterproductively conditional and punitive, and that blames the poor for their own plight rather than addressing the structural causes of poverty. I agree that a social security system should be easily navigable, efficient, and sustainable, and I agree that the right to work is an important way of promoting human dignity. But there are also many other dimensions of human dignity, and they require recognition of a genuine and comprehensive right to social security. As a new member of the UN Human Rights Council, Australia should be leading by example with a human rights-based approach to poverty alleviation, rather than continuing to mistake the symptoms for the cause.